Hello, everyone. Welcome and happy Valentine's Day to anyone who celebrates. If you were wondering what this weird red mark on my face is, I just put it too much to this side. It's a heart. It's a heart. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Welcome. Chantelle dressed up perfectly for Valentine's Day, bringing the red. I love it. Yes, pop of color. Oh, yes, Jersey represent Maryland. Loving it. I'm from Jersey as well. Bayonne, baby. Um, Oh, I'm so excited about this very spicy topic today, in particular because Chantelle and I were talking earlier about the fact that I had done a similar topic a year ago today, but we didn't have a lawyer on the call. And so there was a certain degree of spiciness that we couldn't quite get into. And so I'm very excited to go one level deeper this time. So if anybody saw this webinar last time and is tuning in again, I promise you, it's the next level up. I'm very excited for it. With that said, let me do some quick intros and walkthroughs, especially if we have any new people on the call today. My name is Melanie Naranjo. I head up the people team here at Athena. We're a compliance training company. We do everything from harassment prevention to cybersecurity, hotline and case management. Our mission is to create more inclusive and ethical workplaces. And one of the ways in which we help do that is by creating people communities and sharing out people resources and partnering with legal experts like Chantelle on the call today. And so I'm very excited to host today's session today, where we're going to talk about some of the trickiest challenges in the HR space, especially the ones that sort of spill into that legal realm that sort of make even the most seniored HR or seasoned HR professionals sweat just a little bit. Chantelle is our lovely legal expert on the call. Chantelle, I don't want to ruin it for you. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little to the audience for anyone who's new to the call today?
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and for including me in this conversation. It's always surprising to me when people want to talk to lawyers and that they're excited to. But hopefully, we get some clarity today with some of these questions about navigating these, spicy or awkward or tricky situations. I am here today as a partner at Medina McKelvey, which is a boutique law firm based in California. I am lead up the advice and counsel department there. Been a practicing attorney for well over 15 years. I focus my practice on investigations, advice and counsel, and also just helping employers keep out of hot water.
Love it. So excited to have Chantelle on the call with us today. If you haven't seen the last webinar we held with Chantelle, it was all about investigations and all. It was a fire. In fact, Chantelle and I were talking, and we already had several people reach out to Chantelle specifically to partner with her directly because the advice she gave was so powerful. I'm very excited to learn even more from you today. With that said, let me share just a little bit about how these webinars work, and then we'll jump into it. I like to make these interactive, and so I will be asking questions. The ask is to put your comments, your answers in the comments section. You usually see that it's just fire comments, and people actually end up making a lot of friendships on these chats. So feel free to share your information if you want someone to reach out afterwards or whatever. I will occasionally call on someone to unmute themselves. If you don't want me to call on you, I don't want that to be a deterrent to you participating. So just put an asterisk next to your response, and that will be my cue not to call on you. But if I do call on you because you don't have an asterisk, Amanda, who's working tirelessly behind the scenes, will give you access to unmute yourself, and then we'll be able to have a nice chat. With that said, let's go ahead and get started all. So the agenda for today, we're going to do some tricky situations with Chantelle, really exploring some of the biggest, hottest topics right now in HR that are the scariest and that lean into legal territory. I'm talking performance management, terminations, and challenges with your leadership team. At the end, we will have just a moment of an Athena spotlight to tell a little bit more about who we are, what we do, and a fun special promotion we're putting out to webinar. I don't know what's happening right now, but I'm going to trust Amanda ask something in the comments. And then at the end, we will leave time for questions with Chantelle. So if you've got questions throughout the webinar, please go ahead and just put them in the Q&A section. If you put them in the comments, we might miss them. Probably will miss them. All right, let's go ahead and kick it off. Tricky situations. One of the things that I think about a lot in the HR space is what does it mean to be HR? What is our role? And I remember chatting with someone a little while back on LinkedIn, and they gave me the most perfect definition that I have ever seen ever. Oh, that's what the asterisk is for. Okay. Just so you know, so I don't miss it, because I won't know who put an asterisk in now. When I call on you in your response, put an asterisk next to your response, and that's how I'll know not to call on you. Thank you. Amanda told me behind the scenes what was happening because I missed it. Okay. This is the most perfect definition I've ever seen for HR, which is the purpose of HR is to make your company an awesome place to work and also make sure we don't do anything stupid. Uh, it's a little facetious. Yes, I'm with you, Chantelle. I'm like laughing my butt off. But the reality is, right, we are balancing this really tricky sort of dynamic where, yes, our goal is to empower the business strategy through our people strategy, to retain, to recruit, all these things. And also there is a very important aspect of HR that is also risk mitigation. That's important, right? There are no employees to empower if the company goes out of business because of 5 million lawsuits, okay? Or one very big lawsuit. And so it is really important as we're talking about things in the HR space that we are thinking about risk mitigation and the legal side of things and how to make sure we're tackling things appropriately. And I will say something that always catches me by surprise is sometimes as situations come up, I'm sort of like, no, that's not real. That can't possibly be a thing. But I will tell you actually a personal anecdote. I was just chatting with a friend yesterday. Don't worry, she doesn't work at Athena, and I'm not going to name her company. She was working with a client, and she told me that her client was talking very innocuously about this vacation that he's getting ready to go on, and he commented just in passing, oh, and I'll be thinking of you in a bikini. I'll be,
Classy.
yeah, real classy, real classy. And I thought, no, surely this is not real, but it is. And the more people I talk to, the more these stories they just come up. People just do real awkward, inappropriate things at work. And at Athena, that's very top of mind for us, especially when we think about things like our harassment prevention training. Some of these examples, I look at them and I think, oh my gosh, is this real? And the reality is they are. These are real, very realistic, relevant examples. And if you don't believe me, I actually want to do a bit of a pulse check with you all, and then we'll jump into questions. Yes or no in the comments, and now put your asterisk next to your response if you don't want me to call on you. Yes or no in the comments. Can you tell me how you answer this following question? I have come across pretty tricky situations during my HR career. Okay, yeah, they're flooding in. All right, yeah, all of you, pretty much, right? I have yet to meet an HR person who didn't have a wild story to tell. Now, I'm very carefully going to look through the comments and only call on someone who didn't include an asterisk. No worries. Let's call on. Let's see. Oh, many asterisks, so I'm gonna be careful. Kristen Curry. Yes, in all caps, Kristen Kristen. If you could unmute yourself. You don't have to give me the specifics if you don't want to, only share as much as you're comfortable with. But generally speaking, what are you seeing in the realm of tricky situations in the HR world? What categories or buckets of things are you seeing?
Hi, Melanie, also fellow New Jersey person over here.
I mentally
Go New
subconsciously do
Jersey.
that. Yes.
Yes. I am currently in the startup world. So a lot of it is coming down to a lack of policies being in place, and it just being kind of a free for all where I am right now and trying to get that locked down. So everywhere from performance management, merit increases, parental leaves, it's all a bit of a mess right now. But had some very fun situations throughout my time, including a trip down to an NYPD precinct for an employee relations issue.
Oh my God. If we were in a private room, I would be asking you so many follow-up questions, Kristen. Out of respect to you and your company or past company, I will not ask them right now. But thank you. Thank you very much, Kristen, for sharing. Chantelle, I would love to turn it over to you, our legal expert, for a second here. First of all, any shock in response to so many yeses to this question?
Absolutely not. Um, I this is part of why I actually love my job and I love employment law because this kind of this human element to it, where, you know, people are people and people are going to make mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes can be pretty dramatic. So none of this surprises me at all, actually.
Oh boy. In that case, since we have you, I would love to pick your brain and go one level deeper, just because I
Yeah.
find in particular, half the battle with a lot of HR tricky situations is feeling alone and wondering like, am I the only one? Are other people struggling with this? Is this a common thing? And so Chantelle, I'd love to ask, in your experience partnering with investigations as an employment lawyer, all those things, what bucket of things in the HR space do you see that most workplace tricky situations fall under in your experience? What where are they stemming from? Where are they coming from?
Well, I think what makes, you know, being an HR professional so challenging is that there are so many buckets. Like, let's just start there. Um, there is so many things that you need to be an expert in, so many things that you need to be able to issue spot. So sometimes it's actually really hard to say, well, this is the one where it's, you know, the worst out of all the tricky situations. But in answering your question, I think the one that is the most challenging to navigate is ones where we're dealing with leaves and accommodations. And the reason for that is because there's kind of two pieces to that particular issue. There is, you know, the human issue, you know, somebody could be going through a really personal hard time, or they could be caring for someone that's going through a hard time. And then there's also all the ticky tacky legal requirements, you know, letting them know about FMLA leave, doing it in 3 days, making sure that you're engaging in the interactive process and not just having a conversation with somebody about their leave, but doing it within kind of the strict parameters of the law, kind of following those rules of engagement. So I think that's probably the most tricky one to navigate. And, you know, as you were talking about these tricky situations, I actually thought of one that came to mind that plays into this, where I had someone who had an employee who was in a company vehicle with other individuals there, wasn't asking for a bathroom break, and was actually urinating in a bottle in the back of the van, and people were complaining about it. And so when we first got the information about it, um, I will admit I had a chuckle, because it's like only in my world is that the call that you get it, you know, as you're like trying to eat your lunch. You're like, oh, okay, let's stop everything and deal with that. But what's interesting about that is that when you really kind of think about it, it's like, well, what's going on with this person? Like, do they perhaps have a medical condition? Like, is that why this is happening? Is that why they, you know, maybe they need a need for frequent bathroom breaks? Maybe this person needs an accommodation. So it's that layer aspect is the other thing that is just so tricky for HR professionals to navigate. And I just have the utmost respect for all that you all do.
Wow. It's literally all I have to say. Just wow. And thank you, because I'm going to guess that many people, first of all, you're getting a lot of reactions, claps, hearts on this. I'm going to guess that there are many people on this call who have had maybe not that exact issue, but similarly tricky and bizarre and just like, I don't know how to react issues. And it's just
Mhm.
helpful to know, okay, you're not alone. Oh. With that said, let's jump into the meat of this. All right. I want to talk about performance management because as I talk to people, it feels like everyone and their mom is thinking about performance management right now. And in fact, I want to pulse check it. In the comments, can you give me a yes or a no? Performance management is a top priority this year. You know, who here is thinking about, yeah, okay, lovely. I'm not going to call on anyone this time in the interest of time, but it's just helpful to see, yeah, this is a pretty hot topic. And actually, just so you all know, next month, we're going to do a training all around performance management and how to manage that. We'll also be sharing resources in our follow-up email from this call on performance management. We'll share our performance management, our performance review template, all that good stuff. So keep an eye out for the email, sign up for our next webinar if you'd like to learn more. With that said, I'm gonna end the screen share just so that, well, okay, let's see if I can figure this out. If I can't figure this out, we're not gonna do it all. Okay, there we go. Stop share just
Ooh.
so we can see Chantelle and my beautiful faces here
Oh, yes.
while we chat a little more intimately here. Let's dig into performance management, and I wanna start with a tough one, okay, a tricky.
Okay.
So I'm curious to know, legally speaking, Chantelle, just like maybe this is more like a spilling tea kind of question. Where have you seen performance management discussions go wrong? Like, what are the most common mistakes that companies make?
Not being fully honest with the person. So having performance management can be really tough conversations, especially if the person isn't seeing or understanding how they're not making, like, where their deficits are. And there's that people element to it where navigating that you're not being clear. And maybe you, the manager, or with HR support, really feel like you're being clear, and that's a part of the performance management issue to begin with. But I think that's really where kind of the heart of the matter comes in, because I see plenty of times, especially when I litigated, that someone would be terminated, and they would, when I would talk to the manager, everyone would talk about what a poor performer this person was. And then you look at their performance review and you're like, well, why was this person getting fives? And why were you giving, glowing comments? And it's that gentle balance. And this is really where, you know, there's where I really think about risk mitigation, because risk mitigation means not only following the law, but also approaching people in a way that they feel that they're being heard and given a fair chance and shake. So it's like that balance in performance management of identifying the things that they're doing right and they shouldn't be changing, but also being very direct about the things that they need to change, how quickly they need to change it, and working with them to develop the tools in order to change them. And then, of course, documenting it, because you don't want a situation down the road where someone says, nobody ever talked to me about that. And the manager's like, I've been talking to you about it every week for 6 months. So definitely write it down too.
Oh, Chantelle, this is okay. This is so spicy and relevant. First of all, towards the end, we're going to talk about leadership challenges. Chantelle,
Yeah.
we're going to chat about this because, to your point, sometimes it's hard to get people to commit. And
Yeah.
in next month's webinar, we're also going to talk about, why do managers do that? Why do managers refuse to give the tough feedback, but then want to fire the person? Why do managers tolerate underperformance and then ask HR leaders to come in and do the performance management for them?
When they're exasperated at that point.
Yes, they don't
Yeah.
bring you in until it's sort of like, now it's damage control versus
Right.
partnership, proactive partnership, right? Oh yeah, we got that. Okay, Chantel, let's go one level deeper then.
Okay.
Let's assume this person truly has been struggling with their performance, and the manager, they've been partnering with HR, they're giving the direct feedback, they're not sugarcoating, and they're even being clear on the severity of the issue. Hey,
Yeah.
if you don't make meaningful progress on this soon, quickly, in the next few weeks, your job is going to be at risk.
Mhm.
And then you find out, oh, well, the reason this person is struggling, talking about nuance and layers, is this person is struggling with mental health issues. Maybe there's
Mhm.
something, horrible happening in the world, which is
Yeah.
quite often. Maybe there's a personal issue. Maybe someone is struggling with a miscarriage. Maybe there is just a personal issue that's going on. How do you manage this sort of situation? What are your options when, yes, you want to have empathy, you want to support this person, and also it is still your job to hold
Yeah.
people accountable to the very real business needs that you need to hold people accountable to in order for the business to continue to thrive.
Right. So this is really tricky. And a lot of times this does come up because through these discussions, you realize that it's not necessarily something happening in the workplace, especially for that, person. You're like, you are a star. Like, what's happening? And the key thing here is, this kind of goes back to my accommodations comment that I had earlier and how tricky it is. Because once you, as the manager or HR, are on notice that somebody's not meeting their performance expectations because of these outside influence, in particular mental or some kind of physical ailment, you're now on notice that this person may need an accommodation. And you need to start having a conversation about that. What I want to see in a perfect situation, and I know perfect situations don't always exist, but I really love it when your HR team is big enough that then you can collaborate. This is not a manager discussion, walking through the accommodations. That's an HR discussion. And if you've been pairing as a manager, if you've been pairing with HR to deal with the performance issues, It's great if you have a big enough HR team that somebody else can swoop in on the side that's not a part of the performance issues and can help navigate and help this person explore what they need, whether it's leave, whether you have resources that you offer counseling or any of those things. But in a perfect world, you really have them in channels so that this person understands, all right, with this team, I'm dealing with my performance. And with this team, I'm getting the support that I need that's kind of separate and apart from kind of traditional performance issues in order for me to meet those goals and expectations.
I really love, I think implicitly what I'm hearing there, which is in order for this to work, your managers have to know enough to know when it's time to take a step back and pull in HR.
Yeah.
I can imagine, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, right? I can imagine an HR, a manager from a place of good intent, just getting too in the weeds and too involved. Tell me more. What do you mean you're struggling with this? Well, let me give you some advice because I went through a similar issue, and this is what I think you should be doing, right? And it just
Absolutely.
right, it just quickly spirals out of control. And so
Yeah.
I really like this idea of separating out the two things. And if I'm hearing you correctly, the two can coexist. You can be performance managing someone and you can be providing someone feedback. In which case, I want to ask a tricky follow-up question, which I think comes up quite often, more often than most of us like to acknowledge, which is, to your point, thinking about if somebody needs or has needs, reasonable accommodations. I personally, in my HR experience, in my decade working here, I have seen many instances where, you put someone on a PIP, for example, and upon communicating the PIP, a person responds, well, actually, I think I need reasonable accommodations, right? And now I would like to request those. And I'm not making any comments or any judgments. I'm just saying that
Right.
the two often happen or can happen at the same time. My
Yeah.
question to you is, right, if somebody does that, what does that mean? Does that mean that the PIP has to be on hold? Does the PIP continue? How do you navigate a situation where someone has now requested a reasonable accommodation, but you're now at the 30-day mark and they've been underperforming and now things are really at a boiling point in terms of their performance? What do you do?
Yeah. So I think this is one of those things where, each situation is completely unique. And, while this is part of why an HR's job is so challenging, is that while we have these guideposts, there are, shades of gray with every single person. And part of this is to think about, okay, are these accommodations that are impacting their performance? Or what is the accommodation that they need? So, for example, if the person is like, I just need leave, I need to reset, then obviously then the PIP just pauses. The person goes out on leave. But this is really important to remember. If somebody goes out on leave, that doesn't like wipe the slate clean. They just come back into the PIP. It's or if you're performance managing someone, you've been coaching somebody, it's not like the leave erases at the past. It's okay, we took a break because you were on leave, but now we got to get back to doing the work. Because remember, that's the purpose of a leave. The purpose of a leave is to get you back into work in a way that you can fully function at your job. All right. So then there also could be accommodations where you realize through this conversation that part of the reason they're not meeting the expectations is because they haven't been properly accommodated. And, I've certainly seen situations where people who are, strong performers have perhaps kept things kind of under wraps. So, for example, maybe somebody is, has suffers from dyslexia, and part of the issue is that they are, creating copy that has lots of typos in it, and they're having spelling mistakes and grammar, and they haven't told anyone about their issue. And then they disclose it as part of the performance management. And then you can work together, obviously, with HR support, like, oh, what do you need? Let's get you Grammarly. Do you need more lead time? Part of it can be in a really interactive discussion about how we can meet these performance goals. Because I certainly see this. There's a myriad of reasons why people take leave or seek accommodations, but I've certainly been seeing a trend, and I think actually in particular with the shift into a remote workforce, where people thought that they could keep certain things kind of under wraps because they weren't coming into the office. And then when they dealt with performance management, it really put it to a head that like, actually, I need to disclose to you about how I need support. And then that's where HR comes in to figure out if this is actually something that you can support? Is this reasonable? And also, I mean, it really could go a long way to helping the person actually reach their performance goals.
I really love this balanced approach that you're taking because, I'll speak for the HR community here. And in the comments, please feel free to disagree with me if you're like, Melanie, you are misrepresenting. Okay. I think sometimes when you're in the thick of it and you've got, maybe there are like 5 performance issues happening and you're managing and then, maybe 2 of them request reasonable accommodation and it's at the, 11th hour. I think it's very easy to sort of feel one, overwhelmed, but 2, then wonder, is this even relevant to your point where you said, sometimes the reasonable accommodation request is not relevant to the performance issues that are happening and it's not going to really make a difference. But
Yeah.
sometimes it genuinely is and could lead to the path of solution. And so I really like this sort of reminder of like, hey, let's look at this holistically. It could be this, it could be this, it could be a myriad of things, but let's explore it and see where it takes us. And it doesn't have to be this really overwhelming, scary thing. It's a process. It's a process. You pursue it and you keep performance managing throughout the process.
Yeah. And even with accommodations, remember that you still have to be performing the essential functions of your job.
Yep.
And so, like I said, it's not this, free pass or things get erased, but it is like, okay, how can we truly support you? Because frankly, any performance management conversation should be, what are the tools and support that you feel like you need that you're not getting in order to do your job? And sometimes you may not be able to offer all of those. I mean, putting accommodations aside, but it's good to understand kind of where they're seeing their limitations. And as also a plug, this is why you want to do performance management before things are acute, because there's nothing worse than someone saying like, well, I need a leave. And the manager's like, the world is crumbling around me. We want to start this early in the process so that the world's not crumbling around the manager when they're dealing with this.
100%. And I even like sort of, I think what you were hinting at, which is, maybe the person just maybe they felt embarrassed and they didn't want to disclose this thing. And they only disclose it when they realize, oh, wait, like it's actually causing a problem. I now have to. And that's understandable, right? People are entitled to their own privacy and maybe not wanting to disclose a thing. And so the more you can have these transparent conversations, the more opportunities you can have to encourage someone to share something if we can help them. With that said, I'm going to pivot into, or I'm going to ask our last performance based question. If you have more questions on performance management, please put them in the Q&A. We will try to leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end for this. Last question. Now, this one I think is real tricky. We're going to have to time box it. Let's see, like in 3 minutes, what you can share, because we got so many more to get through. But I had to ask this one. What if in the middle of a manager sort of performance managing someone, maybe they put someone on a PIP, the direct report shares or sort of, goes to HR and they say, do you know what? I think that this is gendered feedback, or in any other way, I think this is biased feedback. This is not fair feedback. It's not justified feedback. I have a problem with it. I think there's discrimination happening. What do you do? How do you handle a situation like that?
I know this comes up. This is my world. I get these calls all the time. And I would even, add to your hypothetical. Sometimes it's happening in the performance management where the employee is telling the manager directly, like, you know what, I think you're doing this because you're biased about X, Y, and Z. That's how I take this performance management. So if that happens, obviously we want the manager to let HR know if they weren't in the room. And as a obviously, there's different situations, but as a general matter, what we want to do then is just pause the performance management. This would be a good time to investigate, determine, all right, is this performance feedback, is it legitimate? Is there anything here that is giving us the indicator that there may be bias here? Because if there is bias, then you don't want to move forward with the performance management as is. You need to be able to address it. And then, when you're talking to the manager about it, who may be up in arms because, they feel like they've been wrongly accused and the person isn't listening to the performance management, this also on the back end will help them do the performance management, because then it won't be, assuming it comes out that the performance management is legitimate and there is no bias, then the performance management won't be questioned down the road, especially if you have to terminate this person. So it's better to take a pause and address it right away. This really goes into the investigations piece of like why you want to do this kind of promptly, so that you can move on with the performance management piece as swiftly as possible, assuming that you don't find bias. This also applies in the context of, I've certainly seen this where somebody's been, I'm about to move forward with the termination. They've made the decision, they just haven't notified the person yet. And lo and behold, the person goes to HR and says, hey, this has been going on, and I think this person is, treating me differently because of XYZ. In that situation, your best bet is likely to pause the termination, look into the issue, and then if there is nothing there or you can't substantiate it, then go ahead and move forward with the termination at that time.
Super helpful, Chantelle. What I love about these questions is that I imagine these are questions that many of us have that are we're maybe too nervous to ask about, or we don't have a resource to ask about, because it is this really tricky territory where it's an HR responsibility, but it's also a little bit legal. So thank you very much on behalf of all HR people for chatting with us about this. Oh, we're gonna pivot. Did I do this right? Can you see this slide? Yes, termination.
Well done.
Thank you. I'm trying. Oh, we're gonna talk terminations. I would do a quick pulse check question just to get us back engaged and chatting with each other. 1 to 5, I'd love to hear from you all. How much do you agree with the following statement? 5 being I really agree. I sometimes wonder if I could have handled a termination better. And while the answers come in, I think this is just such a relevant topic right now, especially because if you all were on the call with us last month, we were chatting about, this new TikTok trend where people are recording themselves being let go from their companies. And it's just put this real spotlight on terminations. And for the record, we should always be thinking about how effectively we're handling terminations, but it sort of made it a little more top of mind and even scarier than it's been for a long time. I'm seeing all these 5s. In the interest of time, I'm not going to call on anyone. Also because I imagine this is probably a topic that people are a little nervous to chat about. So don't worry, I'm respecting you all. I get it. I'm curious to know, Chantelle, please put us out of our misery. When you think about terminations and when you partner with HR professionals about this, what comes to mind for you as best practices? And in particular, I'm curious to know about that live discussion. How much do you recommend people communicate? How long should it be? How brief should it be? Do you give people warning? Do you not give people warning? Is that cruel? Is that strategic? Talk to me a little bit.
Yeah, so it really depends on the grounds for the termination. And as a general matter, I would say, it shouldn't be a big discussion. The termination has been made, the decision has been made, the time for discussion is actually over. This is really about notice and doing it in a way that is, shows compassion and professionalism, but also just really kind of puts a fine point on the end of the relationship. And there's so many reasons that someone could be terminated. And I recently heard a story of somebody who their position was eliminated. They were it was a layoff, and the person conveying it to them was, you could tell they didn't want to eliminate the position and was giving them job referrals. But that actually, I think, was really helpful in that situation. It really showed that it wasn't this person. It wasn't about them. It wasn't about their performance. It was just, we can't afford this role anymore. When somebody, what I think an important piece is that I see this a lot where there is, numerous reasons to terminate somebody. And instead of kind of addressing those, sometimes an employer will want to go to like either the kind of the low hanging fruit and just really hang their hat on one thing. I would just caution you in that situation, if there's any legal risk, you want to be probably disclose more at that point. Simply because if there is a lawsuit and they ask, why was this person terminated? And you only tell them one thing in the termination meeting, or more importantly, you give them a termination notice and it says you're terminated for absenteeism or something that's very black and white, for example. But part of the reason you didn't give this person a second chance is because they've been in performance management. There's been all these issues. People, they create this toxic environment. If you don't address that, then down the road, if they sue you, your hands are really tied as to the reason for the termination. So while I can't give any kind of like black and white, like this is what you do, because of course I'm a lawyer, so I don't do black and white. It's all, very fact specific. I think you really need to think through the long game here. And anytime you think that you've gotten an easy way out, I would just encourage you to pause and think, is there a reason to tell this person more? And with the performance, if someone is being terminated for performance, it should not be a surprise to them that they're going to be terminated. That doesn't mean that you tell them a week in advance, like, hey, we're going to term you in a week. That's not what I mean. I mean that their performance management has been such that it is not a surprise that this is the next step, because you have done everything else to get yourself there.
I really love that. And I think, I know this is scary for most managers and maybe even for some HR people. I always recommend that the manager say at some point before that termination discussion, hopefully several weeks before then, the actual words, your job is at risk. That those stakes are on the table right now. That's what we're working with. Because at that point, at a minimum, you can refer back to that conversation, when you're having that live discussion. Hey, especially if it's performance-based, hey, we're meeting today because, as you know, we've been having several performance discussions around things that aren't working. As I shared with you, your job was at risk. We have unfortunately made the difficult decision today to part ways, however you word that. But it's so important to be able to reference very specific things that have, in fact, very specific conversations that have, in fact, already happened. I'm gonna ask you one lightning round question real quick before we move on to one, because I think this is a tricky one, especially with the TikTok trend. What do you do if the conversation goes off the rails? What do you do if the manager goes off script? What do you do if the person on the other side of it becomes, a little bit belligerent, for lack of a better word, and they just start interrupting and trying to take control of that discussion? How do you take back control, or do you take back control? What do you do?
You just yell technical difficulties and you shut your computer and run. No, I'm just kidding. You don't do that.
Are you sure? Because I just wrote that down as a no. Is that not legal?
I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Must be bad connection. No, I think really what it comes down to is having that gut feeling where you realize I can't. I think the most important thing is realizing you can't bring it back in. So even saying in a termination conversation, you know what? I don't think that this conversation is actually fruitful at this point. So if you're in person, making sure that there's someone there to escort them out. And then you can let them know, like, if there's anything you need to share with me later on, I encourage you to, give me a call and reach out. But I don't think that this conversation is fruitful anymore. And having the wherewithal to just be like, all right, like, we can't come back from this. But I will say too, about the manager issue, it is really important with your managers that they know exactly what they're supposed to say. And I strongly encourage you to give them a script and say, this is your part, this is my part. And sometimes it may be beneficial once the manager, while you want two people in the room, if you have a manager who perhaps it does seem like they're going off the rails, you may excuse them at a certain point to say, all right, we're just dealing with logistic stuff at this point, final pay, giving them their notice about, Cobra and things of that nature. Why don't you leave the room or have them exit the Zoom? That's a way to kind of take control. And one last little tip is I really like having it be, here's the notice where it's important to have the manager, and then now we're going to deal with the logistic piece of the puzzle, because that way, if it does become appropriate to excuse the manager, it's very easy to do so. There's no reason necessarily to bring that manager back in.
Yeah, I think it's a great tip. I actually always, obviously in preparing the managers ahead of the conversation, I always let them know that, if I'm no longer comfortable with how the call is going, heads up, I may excuse you. Don't be alarmed. Just hop off and we can chat more after. It's just helpful to set that expectation. And I really like what you said earlier around the fact that, when you're having this termination discussion, this is no longer for discussion. The decision has been made and what you're doing is communicating. And I think sometimes even saying that explicitly to the person on the other side with empathy, of course. But if they try to negotiate or they're trying to explain their way out of it, to just very clearly say hey, I'm so sorry, I hear you. And also those conversations have already happened. This is no longer a conversation. This is now a notice. I'm here to share some information with you, including around payroll and benefits. If you have questions around that, we can chat. If not, we can chat more async. Sometimes it really is just about being super direct. These questions are going so well. We are getting short on time, so I'm going to have to be real selective with which questions I follow up on. Let's see. I will ask one more question around terms, and then we'll move on because I want to leave just a little bit of time for leadership.
Sure.
how does a company, actually, let me caveat this with, I think all of us here on the call probably know the feeling of someone no longer being at the company and other employees being very, very curious and eager to know more and talking amongst each other and asking their managers for more. I'm curious to hear, as a legal expert, how does a
Yeah.
company balance, protecting an employee's confidentiality with communicating about an employee's departure to other employees?
I know this is a tricky one. And this is also one where it's really important if you're feeling like it would be beneficial to disclose more information to connect with legal counsel. Because in some places there are very strict laws about what you can and cannot say. And so you just don't want to run afoul of that. Um, and I think really it's here about a balancing act. And there's a difference between curiosity, rumor mill, things of that nature, versus like there may be a need to disclose more because it's kind of integral to the culture of the company. So, for example, let's say someone has been, terminated for, very like egregious behavior, and then they've been, a bully. They've, terrorized the employee workforce. Being more open about that person's termination, not necessarily grounds, but letting them know, like, we've excused this person, or this person is no longer working with us. We're having a meeting to let you all know that this person isn't working with us. I'm going to be your point of contact. This is our plan going forward. If you have individual questions, you come and talk to me individually. You really want to set that tone that if someone does have questions, they really need to go and talk to HR individually. Now, that doesn't mean HR is going to be in a position to talk to them about it and give them specific details, but it's much easier to have a meaningful conversation. Even just like, why are you curious? Like, how can we make sure, like, is there something that we need to address? Or I really want to prepare you and make sure that you have the support that you need without this person going forward. And I would say too, as another tip, when there is that kind of important termination and you need to kind of make a more, obvious disclosure that the person is no longer with the company, a key piece of that is already putting a plan in place about how you're going to support the remaining employees, what changes they're going to see, and really focus the conversation on their ongoing workplace experience rather than like rehashing the past.
I really love that emphasis on like the why, like why are you asking? Because
Yeah.
let's be real. Let's say 50% of the time it's just gossip. It's just, curiosity. But the other 50%, very meaningful 50% is I'm curious about, I'm nervous about my own job security. I don't know how this is going to impact my team. My direct reports are asking me questions and I don't know how to handle those conversations. And so
Yeah.
to your point, it's so, so important to approach with curiosity and partnership versus just being like, everybody shut up. I don't want these questions. So
Yeah,
thank
and
you.
like think about it. Like anytime someone tells you not to talk about something, everyone's like, ooh, tick, 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 tick. So
Yep.
you're better off inviting the type of conversation that's going to be productive and collaborative instead of just trying to get everyone to, keep their mouths shut. And also talking to key leadership that may be fielding these questions proactively. Like if you get questions about this employee, just be like, hey, that's actually kind of an HR issue. You need to talk to so and so. I can connect you. I always kind of convey it when anytime I'm asking leadership or management not to do something, I'm like, think about it. When do you get to tell somebody that it's not your problem, and you go to go talk to somebody else? Like that's as easy as like quickly, you can get rid of an issue. I'm like, take advantage of that. So rope in HR right away.
I love that. There's an interesting conversation happening in the comments that I think may be worthwhile, worth addressing very briefly because I want to squeeze in one leadership question. Somebody's asking, because in my example, I had said like, I'm so sorry on the thing. And it is true that many HR professionals are trained never to say sorry on any calls like this because it could come across as admitting culpability or something we did wrong. So I will actually correct myself and say, what I meant to say is like, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's very important to be clear about what it is you are apologizing for. I personally am also not a fan of a blanket apology. Somebody else in the comments said, there's a difference between like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry that you're struggling with this. I'm sorry, blah, blah. I also think it's very helpful, but, we have a lawyer on the call. What do you have any strong opinions on, whether or not it's okay for an HR professional to use the word sorry in a termination discussion, for example?
All I can think about is, it's like you get in a car accident, you can check on the person, but don't you dare say sorry. So I think that this is once again like these blanket rules. If it's giving yourself a blanket rule, like I'm just not going to say that word because I won't be able to properly frame it, then like do that. Know yourself and own that. I think it really depends on the context. If you do end up saying sorry, I think the key thing is what Melanie said is about being present and naming what it is that you are sorry for. So, like, I can see that you're distressed. I recognize that this is a hard thing to hear, but I do need a couple other things we need to go over, and I just need you to listen right now. Is I think one good way to kind of reframe the issue without also saying sorry. And then if you do say sorry, like talk about like explain what you mean. Now that doesn't mean you then talk for the next 5 minutes, like because the more you're talking, that's a problem. But be concise if you do say that I'm sorry. And then frankly, once again, with the position elimination, we're just dealing with so many companies right now that are in financial distress. And saying that, you're sorry that the business isn't strong enough to hold on to their role, or that, that there just isn't finances to keep this role and we're having to let go, dozens of people. Having that kind of apology is genuine and heartfelt, and I think makes people understand that it's not personal that they've been let go as part of this riff.
I love that. Thoughtful and empathetic as always.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to squeeze in one last question before we
Okay.
go to the end. All right, so this one's about leadership teams. It's a hard-hitting one. What do you do when your own leadership team doesn't follow your own company policies? Maybe they're granting promotions without going through the right process. Maybe they themselves are getting like a little too buddy-buddy. Maybe they're asking very nosy questions about someone's medical. What do you mean this person, you're going to approve their leave? I need to know more. Tell me the details. What do you do when you have a leadership team? Oh, okay, there's some people that needed this question. What do you do
Yeah.
when you have a leadership team that is just like going rogue?
Well, first you do like a big sigh at your desk, just like, because here's the take home. People can't be different rules for different people. Like someone was sharing earlier, Kristen was talking about like being in the startup community, and you're trying to literally develop the rules as you're building the plane. It's like, what's that expression, like you're building the plane as you're flying it, like so I certainly see in the startup world where we even see more of that disparagement between like it's what the managers are doing and what maybe people that are less senior are doing. But the key thing here is that it doesn't matter what your role is, what level you are, you have to follow the same rules as everybody else. So the person that makes the coffee in the office has the same rules as the CEO. And if anything, the CEO has an even higher standard because of how they represent the company. And there can't be exceptions made. And that's really a cultural issue when we really talk through it that needs to be addressed holistically. And obviously, a huge legal risk when there's a different set of rules for the more senior folks. And your responsibility as an HR professional, I often think it's like akin to being like the grown up in the room or the parent, where it's like, okay, these are the rules, these are the structures. I'm going to help you and encourage you and give you support so that you can do your job. But these are the rules that we all have agreed to play by. And I'm going to help you play by those rules. So, I always love kind of starting first as a positive, like, hey, what you're doing doesn't follow our policies, and this is the consequence. How can we support you to ensure that you can follow them in the future? One, by education, two, by coaching, things like that. And then ultimately, on like the more extreme end, if you're seeing this as a more kind of larger issue, especially if it's very senior leadership, it may be appropriate for you to reach out to your senior HR person or even the board to let them know that there's this discrepancy, because it does pose a really great legal risk to the company.
I really like that framing in particular because I often tell people sometimes part of your job in HR is to remind people what your job is. And I don't even, right? It sounds so silly, but it's true. And I say this to empower HR professionals who worry that, they're going to come across as naggy, or they're going to come across as like problems, starters, like, oh, why are you always stirring things up? Why can't you just do what I tell you to do? You literally hired me to help you mitigate risk and to like call a thing out when I see it. And so if you're
Yep.
getting that kind of pushback, it's important to understand and have be equipped with the right language to navigate those tricky situations. We'll actually share this. Just reminds me, we have a resource on this, so we'll share this in a follow-up email, how to build relationships with your stakeholders and how to navigate pushback with your CEO. So keep an eye out.
Yeah.
Really, really helpful, Chantelle.
Yeah, and I would add like one other thing, because I just can't be quiet, is I do a fair amount of executive coaching as well.
Mhm.
And sometimes what I've really realized in doing this is sometimes the executive gets so focused on the one thing they did wrong that
Mm.
they don't actually see the bigger picture. And when you help them understand the bigger picture, how this is impacting, for example, attrition, how this is impacting your brand, how, like, what is the larger kind of reaction to what it is that you're doing? Oh, hey, kitty, kitty. Then it helps give them the perspective that you're not being nitpicky. You are helping them and helping the business, and all these little things, when they all add up, become very big things. So let's address it.
Love that. Okay. We are short on time, so let's get back into it real quick at the very end. I'm going to share our promos real quick, and then we'll squeeze in as many questions as possible, and then we'll set everyone free. I want to spend just a quick minute sharing a little bit about Athena. We're a compliance training company. We were chatting earlier about setting your managers up for success. We actually literally have a training that's all about that. It's basically managing within the law. It trains your managers on how to know when to identify a reasonable accommodation, what their role is, and how to partner with an HR partner on terminations, all that good stuff. And we have, of course, harassment prevention training, really realistic examples, fresh content. Additionally, we have a hotline and case management tool. So if you are struggling with any difficult things that are coming up and, it's hard to track everything, we've got a platform for you all. We are actually offering a special promotion for webinar attendees. We will be sharing more information in the follow-up email, so keep an eye out. But we are offering a discount. And for larger companies, we actually have one special deal where you can actually get one of our products for free. So keep an eye out for more on that to come. We are also continuing our $100 gift card. So if you would like to enter for a chance to win a $100 gift card to either Amazon, Uber, or DoorDash, all you got to do is make a post on LinkedIn sharing your favorite insight from today's session between me and Chantelle, tag Athena, and on Friday we will pick a lucky winner. So go ahead and do that. It doesn't take very long. Here are some examples if you want to check them out. With that said, anyone who tuned in for SHRM or HRCI credit, thank you. I'm going to leave this up. Amanda, if you could please also put up the poll. We would love if you could help us answer just a couple of questions. I'm going to be at Transform next month. I would love to meet with some of you if you all are around. Let us know which of you is coming when the poll pops up. And we will see who we can connect with, maybe set up a couple of meet and greets. And I will be quiet for a second while people pull up their SHRM. Actually, I'm not going to be quiet because I wanted to say thank you to everyone who asked for us to provide HRCI credits. We got this registered just for you, so please continue to share feedback. Now I will be quiet while you complete the poll, please. Okay, so while people, go ahead, fill that out if you like. I'm going to go ahead and move it over to Q&A. Chantelle, I'm going to start asking as many questions as we can squeeze in. Oh no, I almost scratched my heart off. My question to you is an interesting one. We had a couple of people asking about HR and the conflict of interest that can come up sometimes. What if you are both the manager and HR, and you are managing a tricky performance issue like a reasonable accommodation request or an accusation of bias in the process?
This is where it just becomes so important to collaborate. If you have the resources to have, you have a large HR team, or even frankly an HR team of two, bringing in someone else from the team to assist and help you navigate those issues. And so that way, as I was saying earlier, you can, if needed, kind of break things into channels and kind of wall things off. And if you don't have those types of resources on the HR team, I would even just look to your leadership. Is there somebody that can join with you in the performance management, in the navigating of, the tricky situation from HR, so that once again, you have kind of these two people's perspectives? Because one of the things that was kind of coming up earlier, and I saw this in the comments, is, you know, for example, for a termination meeting, ideally you want to have at least two people there, because then you have two witnesses, if you will, to what happened. And that absolutely is the gold standard, and you want two people there. I would say you're only excusing the manager in that instance if, as we said earlier, you're going off the rails. But this is a good example too, where it's like, all right, like let's leverage that proactively. So grabbing someone from your team to help, or grabbing someone from leadership so that you're not flying solo.
Love that. Super helpful. We've got an interesting one, which is sort of, I think, an addendum to our last question around leadership challenges. What if the issue is less that they're being nosy, but in fact that they're perpetuating toxic, unethical behaviors? Like they themselves are part of the problem that you are trying to solve at your company.
So, I see this for sure in my line of work. And sometimes it actually, comes from a mindset where they have no perception that it's actually creating a toxic and unhealthy environment. Um, I see this especially in the context of competition and how competition is managed within a company. This is really when, it's important to kind of take a step back and say, all right, if this person's a part of the larger problem, like, is an investigation warranted? Do we need to kind of deal with this in its own, in isolation, before we can address the kind of larger cultural issues? And I have certainly seen a trend lately where, in the last couple of years, where, for example, let's say like a founder in a company is, the company is very different now that the company has gone public or the company has been sold, and the founder ends up being, instead of a source of inspiration, ends up being, somebody that it's their leadership style no longer matches where the company is. And so where I really see is investors and the board kind of stepping in and helping HR address these issues, whether it's through an outside investigation, whether it's through coaching, or even, asking the executive to leave or demanding that they leave. So really just, I would say my encouragement to you all is, when you see a problem, take a moment to kind of think back, to be like, okay, what are all the potential red flags and causes that we have here? Because it's very often not just one thing. And you may need to be attacking these problems in a multi-pronged approach.
Really appreciate that, Chantelle. We are at time. I want to say big, big thank you to Chantelle for all your valuable insights. We had so many questions, more than we could answer. Chantelle and I are chatting about whether or not we need to schedule a follow-up webinar, maybe do a collab where we answer some of these questions. Keep us posted on what you want. Amanda has shared a survey form. Please fill that out, because we want to know, what other topics do you want to hear? Should me and Chantelle do more collaborations? What kind of resources can we share? For anyone who was just super wowed with Chantelle, which is basically everyone is like, Chantelle, I need your services. Fear not. We're going to be sharing Chantelle's contact information in our follow-up emails. So please keep an eye out for those. Chantelle, a pleasure as always. Truly can't thank you enough.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for including me in this conversation.
Thank you all.